It was supposed to be just another family dinner. But that night, my pregnant daughter-in-law leaned close and whispered into my ear, "You're the father of my baby." The room froze. My wife gasped. My stepson's face turned pale. In one breath, my entire life collapsed in front of everyone I loved. They almost destroyed me with lies. They thought the truth was buried forever. But what they didn't know, what happened next, was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me thank you for your continuous support. If you love stories like this one, support us by subscribing to this channel and comment where you are watching us from. It will be great to hear from you. Now let's jump into the details of what happened. The day started like any other family gathering in our estate. A quiet Saturday filled with laughter echoing from the long dining hall, the smell of roasted turkey, and the low hum of conversations bouncing off the oak-paneled walls. As the head of the family, I always sat at the end of the long rectangular table where every member could see me. My wife, Becky, sat to my right, and across from her was Bruce, her son from her first marriage. Joel, my only son, was still deployed overseas with the Navy SEALs. Beside Bruce sat his wife, Clara, who was 7 months pregnant. She had the glow of a woman expecting life. But that day, there was something else, something dark and unsettling about her eyes. I remember thinking she seemed unusually restless. Her hands fidgeted under the table, and every so often, she'd look at Becky, who nodded in strange reassurance. It wasn't unusual for Clara to be quiet. Joel had told me she was shy when they first married. But what I saw in her eyes wasn't shyness, it was fear. When I tried to catch her gaze, she immediately looked away. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe pregnancy nerves had gotten the best of her. If only I had known that within the hour, the very foundation of my family would be shaken by a single whispered sentence that would change everything. We were midway through dinner when Clara leaned toward me. Her perfume, a soft, flowery scent I'd once bought her as a gift, drifted up faintly as she tilted her head close to my ear. Her voice trembled, just barely above a whisper, and yet those words pierced the air like the sharpest blade. "You are the father of my baby." For a moment, I froze. I thought I misheard her. I stared at her, hoping she'd laugh it off, but she didn't. Her lips pressed tightly together as if she'd just confessed a sin too heavy to bear. I blinked twice, my fork halfway to my mouth, the room spinning slightly as if gravity itself had turned cruel. What are you talking about?" I muttered under my breath, but before I could lean away, Becky's voice cut through the tension. "What's going on?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. Becky had always had a sharp sense for moments of chaos. Clara hesitated for a second, and I prayed silently that she would deny it, that maybe I'd misunderstood. But then she turned her wide, teary eyes toward Becky and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Grandpa is the father of my unborn child." The sound of utensils hitting plates filled the silence that followed. Even the clock on the far wall seemed to pause its ticking. My mind went blank. Bruce's face turned pale. My nephews exchanged awkward, confused glances. Becky's expression twisted into one of horror and disgust, and I could almost feel her hand tighten around her wine glass. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, but my throat went dry. Clara buried her face in her palms, feigning sobs that shook her shoulders. The family stared at me as if I were some kind of monster, as though the accusation had already turned into conviction. Becky's voice came out sharp and trembling. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice quivering between anger and disbelief. "No, Becky," I said calmly, though my heart pounded in my chest. "This is absurd. I've never—" But before I could finish, Bruce slammed his hand on the table. "How dare you sit here acting innocent?" he spat. "You're supposed to be our father figure. How long has this been going on?" His voice cracked, but there was something off about his outrage. It was too measured, too controlled. I looked at him carefully. His jaw was clenched, but his eyes didn't show confusion, they showed fear. That was the first sign that something about this wasn't what it seemed. Clara kept crying, muttering between sobs. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. He promised me he'd tell Joel the truth when the time was right." I stood slowly from my seat, feeling everyone's gaze follow me like wolves circling prey. "That's enough," I said. "You're lying, Clara." But Becky's glare told me she'd already chosen her side. I can't believe this, she said bitterly. You're the head of this family, and this is how you repay our trust. The irony burned inside me like acid. This was my home, my table, my legacy. Yet suddenly, I was being painted as the villain. Then, as the argument erupted around me, something strange happened. Bruce reached out and gently placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, whispering something to her that only she could hear. Her sobs quieted instantly, and when she looked up again, she seemed calmer, as if reassured. That single gesture told me more than words ever could. I had seen that kind of comfort before, not between in-laws, but between lovers. My mind began piecing fragments together. Late-night visits I'd once overheard, hushed laughter near the garden when Becky thought I was asleep, Clara's sudden shift in loyalty toward Bruce whenever decisions about family funds were discussed. Becky turned toward me, pointing accusingly. "You've disgraced this family," she said. Her voice was sharp now, the tears gone, replaced with cold anger. "You're not fit to lead anymore. I think it's time we vote on who truly deserves to manage the estate." The words sent a chill down my spine. That was when it hit me. The whisper wasn't about guilt. It was about power. They wanted to destroy me publicly so the rest of the family would remove me as head of the estate and business empire I had built for over 3 decades. It was a coup, dressed as scandal. I could have exploded. I could have shouted and cursed them all. But instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had seen betrayal before, business partners who sold me out, relatives who envied me. But this was personal. I looked around at the table, at the familiar faces now turned unfamiliar. "If that's what you believe," I said quietly, "then I have nothing more to say tonight." I pushed my chair back and walked toward the hallway, feeling their eyes burn into my back. Becky's voice followed me, dripping with sarcasm. "Running away doesn't make you innocent." As I stepped out of the dining hall, my reflection glimmered faintly against the marble floor, and for the first time that evening, I allowed a thin, knowing smile to touch my lips. They didn't know what I knew. For generations, the patriarch of our family had been entrusted with a secret, one that only the head of the estate could access. Hidden cameras and invisible microphones were embedded within the walls, frames, and even the chandelier, undetectable to the naked eye. My grandfather had told me when he passed the mantle to me, "Power is fragile, son. So is truth. Always have eyes where others think they are blind." I climbed the staircase to my private study, my heart still pounding, though my mind was clear now. I closed the door softly and approached the antique cabinet that stood against the far wall. Hidden inside was an encrypted console disguised as an old radio. I turned the brass knob, entered a code only I knew, and the monitors flickered to life one by one. 30 small screens displaying live feeds from every corner of the estate. My hands trembled as I scanned through them. Then I saw it, Bruce and Clara, just outside the dining hall. He was holding her by the shoulders, whispering urgently. "You did well," he said. "Just keep crying if anyone asks. By next week, he'll be out, and Mom and I will handle everything. Once we take control of the estate, you'll have nothing to worry about." Clara nodded, sniffing softly. "I just hope Joel never finds out," she whispered. Bruce smirked. "He's half a world away. He'll never know." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling deeply. Every suspicion I had was confirmed. Becky knew. Bruce knew. Clara played her part perfectly. They wanted me gone. But what they didn't realize was that their own words, their own schemes, were now trapped in the invisible web I had inherited for moments just like this. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched every corner of the house, every whisper between Becky and Bruce, every signal exchanged between them and Clara. The truth unfolded like a slow, poisonous flower. They weren't just trying to humiliate me. They were building a false narrative to present at the next family meeting. Documents were being forged, photographs edited, all to prove that I had committed the unthinkable. But I had time, and more importantly, I had the truth. I knew that patience would be my weapon, and silence, my armor. Because when the day of reckoning came, I would let them bury themselves with their own words. The morning after that explosive dinner, the house was disturbingly quiet. The air felt heavy with tension, like a storm waiting for thunder. Becky avoided me entirely, which wasn't new. She had always found ways to punish me through silence whenever she felt slighted. But this time, her quiet wasn't born out of hurt. It was strategic. Every corner I turned, I could feel her watching me from a distance, her presence lurking like a shadow stitched to my every move. Bruce and Clara had vanished from the estate early that morning, claiming they were visiting her doctor. Lies. I knew what they were really doing, laying the groundwork for their next move. I walked through the hallway toward the garden, the same one my father used to tend when he was alive. The roses were in full bloom, crimson and white, standing proud and untouched by deceit. I had always believed family was like a garden. You nourish it, prune it, protect it, and it grows beautifully. But if you neglect the weeds, if you allow envy and greed to take root, they choke everything that was once pure. I knelt down beside one of the flower beds, brushing the dirt from my palms, and couldn't help but think how strange it was that betrayal often starts quietly, like seeds planted in secret. I replayed every interaction I'd ever had with Becky since we married 12 years ago. She was beautiful, refined, and calculated. When I first met her, she had just come out of a divorce and was raising Bruce on her own. I was a widower then, with my son Joel, who was barely 15. I thought blending our families would heal us both. She brought laughter and a sense of order to the house. She smiled in all the right ways, spoke with poise, and treated Joel kindly, or so I thought. But little by little, I began to notice her favoritism toward Bruce. It wasn't just maternal, it was territorial. She shielded him from consequences, from responsibility, from discipline. Every time I corrected Bruce for his recklessness or arrogance, she'd defend him like a lioness protecting her cub. Bruce was everything Joel wasn't. Where Joel was quiet and dutiful, Bruce was cunning and impulsive. He had no interest in building anything, only in inheriting it. I had given him opportunities in the family business, minor roles at first, but his greed outgrew his talent. He wanted control, not contribution. When Joel enlisted in the Navy, I remember Becky saying, "At least Bruce will stay to take care of things here." But she didn't mean the house. She meant me. Bruce became her eyes and ears in my affairs, pretending loyalty while slowly twisting narratives behind my back. And then came Clara. When Joel introduced her to us 2 years ago, she was radiant, young, gentle, and humble. She had grown up modestly, but carried herself with quiet dignity. Joel loved her deeply, and so did I. She often came to me for advice about finances and home management while Joel was away. I treated her like a daughter. But over time, I noticed the subtle pull. Becky taking her on shopping trips, Bruce offering to drive her around, family gatherings where Clara suddenly sat next to Bruce instead of across from him. I had dismissed it as casual friendliness, but looking back, it was choreography. Every move had been carefully rehearsed. After that dinner, I went into my study again, where the monitors glowed faintly in the dim light. I scrolled through the recordings from the previous night. There it was, Becky's room, where she sat with Bruce and Clara after I left the dining hall. The three of them huddled close together, whispering. Becky's voice came through clearly. "We did what we needed to do. Now we have to make sure he can't talk his way out of it." Clara wiped her tears, trembling. "But what if Joel calls? He'll ask questions." Bruce smirked. "Then you tell him you can't talk, because Grandpa's been acting strange around you. That'll keep him off for a while." Becky nodded approvingly. "Good. The next family meeting is in 2 days. We'll bring everything then. Bruce, make sure the documents are ready. We'll say we found evidence of inappropriate messages, financial transfers, anything to make it believable." I paused the video, staring at the frozen frame of Becky's expression. She looked proud. That was what stung the most. Not just the betrayal, but the satisfaction she took in it. She wanted me humiliated in front of my kin, stripped of everything that gave me authority. But there was something else, something deeper, that unsettled me. I didn't just see jealousy or greed in Becky's eyes. I saw vengeance. And vengeance requires motive. I rewound the footage, looking for any hint, any word that would tell me why. I found it 30 minutes earlier in the same recording. Bruce had said, "He thinks he can control us just because he runs the estate." "Mom, you said he kept your name off half the holdings, right?" Becky sighed. "Yes. He promised to add me as co-trustee years ago, but he never did." That estate will go to Joel if anything happens to him. So tell me, why should we keep waiting? Bruce leaned closer. Then let's not. That was the seed. It wasn't about betrayal of love. It was about betrayal of power. I had always tried to keep family wealth structured and safe, splitting assets equally between bloodlines, but never merging them. Becky wanted control, and she used her son and Joel's wife to get it. I closed the monitor, my jaw tightening. For the first time in years, I felt something darker than disappointment. I felt resolve. That evening, I decided to test something. I called Clara's phone. She didn't pick up. I called Bruce. No answer. Then I dialed Becky. After the third ring, she answered. Yes. Her voice was sharp, impatient. Where are Bruce and Clara? I asked. Clara said she had a doctor's appointment. She replied flatly. Why? Are you going to accuse her of something else? No, I said calmly. Just wanted to make sure she's all right. It's unlike her to miss dinner. There was a pause. Then Becky said, She's fine. Don't act like you care. And the line went dead. That confirmed everything. They weren't even pretending anymore. They were moving pieces while assuming I was broken. But I wasn't. I was watching. The next morning, I called a private investigator I'd trusted for years, a man named Douglas who had helped me handle legal disputes discreetly. Douglas, I said, I need you to tail my stepson and my daughter-in-law. Discreetly. No one can know. He didn't ask why. He knew my tone well enough to understand this wasn't about business. 2 days later, he sent me a file, photos, time-stamped footage, and one audio recording. The pictures told a story more damning than any accusation. Bruce and Clara, together, in a hotel parking lot. Their bodies too close to be mistaken for coincidence. Their hands intertwined. Their lips brushing under the cover of darkness. The audio confirmed it all. Bruce's voice, low and smug. Don't worry, babe. Once Mom and I get rid of him, you and I can do whatever we want. No more hiding. Clara's faint laugh followed. And Joel, he'll be too far away to matter. I listened to that recording 3 times. Not out of disbelief, but out of cold preparation. They wanted to use deceit as their weapon. I would use the truth as mine. The next family meeting would not be their stage. It would be their undoing. On the day of the meeting, I sat at the head of the table again, just like always. The room filled slowly, everyone chatting nervously. Becky walked in last, her chin held high, Bruce by her side, and Clara following in a loose dress that did little to hide her growing belly. Her eyes darted toward me once, then away. I smiled politely, pretending to be none the wiser. Becky sat across from me, her lips curling faintly as she whispered to Bruce, After tonight, this will be our house. If only she knew. The meeting began formally, with the cousins and uncles discussing quarterly reports and charity disbursements. I let them finish before Becky stood up dramatically. Before we continue, she said, there's something the family needs to know. The air shifted. All eyes turned to her. Clara looked nervous but followed the script. It's about the baby, she said softly. It's not Joel's. She glanced at me, her voice quivering. It's his. Gasps erupted. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Becky slammed her palm on the table. We can't allow a man like this to lead us anymore, she declared. I leaned back, letting them savor their moment. Are you sure that's your final statement? I asked quietly. Bruce smirked. It's over, old man. Becky nodded. You'll step down tonight. I pressed a small button beneath the table, and suddenly, the large flat screen on the far wall flickered to life. The footage began to play, grainy at first, then clear. Becky's room. Their whispers. Their plotting. Bruce's confession. Clara's laughter. Becky's cold instructions. The room went dead silent. Becky's face drained of color. Bruce stood frozen, mouth agape. Clara's trembling hand reached for her stomach as if the walls themselves had betrayed her. I stood up slowly, my voice steady. You thought I built this house without knowing how to protect it? I said, every head of this family knows the truth. Our legacy watches even when we sleep. I turned toward the rest of the family. These 3 conspired to destroy me for power and greed. You all heard their words. Now you will decide their fate. The silence that followed the video's end was almost unbearable. The only sound left in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant ticking of the old family clock mounted on the far wall. I watched Becky's expression closely, her face drained of all color, her lips trembling as she looked at the frozen image of herself on the screen. Bruce's eyes darted between me and the footage as though he couldn't decide whether to deny or to flee. Clara's tears began to flow uncontrollably, her hands clutching her stomach as though the guilt itself had turned into a physical ache. But no one dared speak. They all knew what they had just witnessed wasn't manipulation, it was confession. I walked around the table slowly, my footsteps deliberate, my voice calm. "You thought you could twist the truth," I said. "Fabricate lies so cleverly that no one would dare question them. But here's something you underestimated. Becky, truth doesn't need defending. It only needs time to reveal itself." She opened her mouth as if to speak, but her voice failed her. Bruce finally rose from his chair, his anger overtaking his fear. "You invaded our privacy," he shouted, pounding his fist on the table. "You had cameras in the house without telling anyone." I turned to him, the faintest trace of a smirk on my lips. "Those cameras have existed long before you were born," I replied. "They're not for spying, they're for protection. My grandfather built this estate with a simple rule: family secrets destroy more than enemies ever could. He wanted every head of the house to know when corruption grew within the walls." I paused, letting that sink in. And I suppose today proves he was right. The other family members remained silent, their eyes fixed on me. I could feel their respect returning, replacing the suspicion that had clouded them earlier. They had witnessed betrayal, but they had also witnessed justice unfolding in real time. Still, I wasn't finished. "You wanted to frame me," I said, locking eyes with Becky. "You wanted to destroy my reputation in front of everyone here so you could seize the estate. Tell me, how does it feel knowing that your own ambition dug your grave?" Becky's jaw tightened, her eyes glistening with restrained fury. "You always wanted control," she hissed. "You never trusted me with anything. You kept everything under your name. Every decision, every account, every vote had to go through you." Her voice rose with each word. "I've lived under your shadow for 12 years. Don't pretend this family ever had freedom under you." I let her rant, watching her unravel in front of everyone. "You talk about freedom," I said when she paused to catch her breath. "But what you wanted was ownership. There's a difference. Freedom builds families. Ownership breaks them." Bruce stepped forward now, his face red with rage. "You think you can just play sane after spying on us? You think those recordings make you the good guy?" he sneered. I walked closer to him, lowering my tone to a calm but cutting whisper. "No, Bruce. The recordings make me the man who finally stopped pretending you were family." His face twitched, and for a moment, I saw the child he once was, the spoiled boy Becky had turned into her pawn. But pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. I turned back to the table and addressed the rest of the family. "You all witnessed what they did. You all heard how they plotted. Now, according to our charter, this estate is governed by rules passed down for 3 generations. Betrayal of the bloodline, whether by theft, deceit, or manipulation, results in immediate forfeiture of inheritance and eviction from family property. I invoke that rule tonight." Becky gasped audibly, her hand clutching Bruce's sleeve. "You can't," she cried. "You don't have the authority to." I raised a hand, silencing her. "I do. You gave me that authority when you signed the revised charter 6 years ago, remember? The same one you insisted on finalizing so you could secure Bruce's inheritance in writing. You didn't read the fine print, Becky. I added a clause granting the current head of the family full power of execution in disciplinary cases." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her voice broke. "You planned this," she whispered. "You set us up." I shook my head slowly. "No, you set yourselves up." I just watched. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the rustling of papers as I retrieved a thick envelope from my briefcase. "Inside this," I said, holding it up, "is proof of every financial transaction you and Bruce made from the family accounts without authorization. Every hotel receipt, every wire transfer, every dollar stolen to fund this little fantasy of yours. Clara, your name appears on 3 of those transfers. Don't act surprised. You used Joel's authorization codes while he was overseas. That's not love, it's fraud." Clara sobbed harder, covering her face. "I didn't want to," she began, but Bruce snapped at her. "Shut up. The venom in his voice made the room flinch. That single moment of cruelty turned even the silent relatives against him. I leaned forward slightly. So that's how you speak to the woman you claimed you were protecting? Bruce's glare met mine, but this time there was no arrogance, just panic. I handed the envelope to my attorney, who had been quietly sitting at the far end of the table since the meeting began. File the documents with the board first thing tomorrow, I instructed. Effective immediately, revoke their access to estate funds, vehicles, and accounts. Becky's eyes widened. You can't just throw us out, she shouted. Where will we go? What will we do? Her tone had changed now, fear replacing anger. I looked at her for a long time before answering. That's the thing about betrayal, Becky. It doesn't end when the plan fails. It begins when trust is gone. And tonight, you've lost that forever. Bruce tried to speak again, but one of the security officers standing by the door stepped forward. Mr. Hawkins, he said firmly, addressing me. Should we escort them out? I nodded slowly. Yes. Give them 15 minutes to gather their belongings. Becky rose from her chair abruptly, knocking over her glass of wine. It spilled across the table, staining the white cloth deep red. For a second, she just stood there, staring at it, perhaps realizing how symbolic it was. A spill that couldn't be cleaned. A stain that wouldn't fade. They left the room one by one. Bruce stormed past me, his shoulder brushing mine intentionally, muttering something under his breath I couldn't quite catch. Clara trailed behind, crying softly, whispering apologies I no longer cared to hear. Becky was the last to leave. She stopped at the door and turned around, her voice trembling with something between regret and hatred. You think you've won, she said. But you'll die alone, surrounded by your precious walls and cameras. I didn't respond. I simply turned away and said, at least the walls don't lie. When the door shut behind them, a long exhale escaped my chest. The rest of the family sat in uneasy silence. Some looked relieved, others were visibly shaken. My nephew Daniel, one of the younger members, finally spoke. Uncle, he said, I don't understand how they could do this. How could people you share blood with go this far? I looked at him for a moment, trying to find the right words. Greed doesn't need distance, I said finally. It only needs an opportunity. And love, when mixed with envy, becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. That night, I didn't sleep much. The house felt emptier than it had in years. Every corner carried an echo of laughter that once felt genuine. I walked through the corridors, passing portraits of generations before me. Men and women who had endured their share of betrayal but never let it destroy them. I understood now why the family tradition of surveillance had existed. It wasn't about paranoia, it was about preservation. Truth, after all, is the only inheritance worth keeping. I stopped in front of the nursery door, the one Joel and Clara had decorated together before his deployment. Inside, the soft yellow walls were lined with tiny stars, a mobile hanging over an empty crib. I stood there for a while, staring at the stillness. Part of me pitied Clara. She had been drawn into their web, manipulated by promises of comfort and power. But pity couldn't erase the damage she'd caused, or the pain Joel would feel when he learned the truth. Still, I decided something that night. I wouldn't tell Joel everything immediately. Some truths needed to wait until the right moment to do their healing. The following morning, the household began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after an earthquake of betrayal. The staff whispered among themselves, their relief obvious. For years, Becky had ruled them through intimidation, often undermining my authority in subtle ways. Now, there was peace in their steps. Even the butler, Mr. Collins, who had served 3 generations before me, smiled faintly as he poured my morning coffee. Justice has a strange taste, sir, he said softly. Bitter at first, but satisfying in the end. I nodded. You're right, Collins. It's an acquired flavor. Later that day, I stood by the window of my study, watching the gates close behind the black sedan carrying Becky, Bruce, and Clara. They didn't look back. I wondered if guilt would ever catch up to them, or if they would simply rewrite their own version of the story elsewhere. Either way, it didn't matter. The truth had been spoken, the evidence sealed, and the house purified of its poison. But as I watched the car disappear down the long driveway, I couldn't shake a strange feeling that this wasn't the end. The seeds of betrayal had been uprooted, yes, but some roots have a way of growing back when watered by vengeance. And something told me that Becky wasn't done trying to rewrite her ending. It's strange how silence sounds different after betrayal. For weeks, the estate felt unnaturally quiet. No sound of Becky's heels clicking down the corridor, no echo of Bruce's laughter bouncing off the marble floor, no faint hum of Clara's soft humming from the garden. Yet, it wasn't peace I felt. It was watchfulness. The kind that comes when you've survived a storm, but still hear thunder rolling in the distance. I thought I had put an end to their scheme the night they left, but deep down, I knew better. People like Becky and Bruce didn't accept defeat. They waited for opportunity. And in our family, opportunities came wrapped in tradition and inheritance. A week after their eviction, I received the first letter. No name, no return address. Just a white envelope with my name written in cursive, Becky's handwriting. Inside was a single line. You may own the house, but you'll never own the truth. I read it 3 times before folding it neatly and locking it in the desk drawer. I didn't react, at least not outwardly. Over the years, I had learned that reacting gave power to those who thrived on chaos. Instead, I turned to the very tools they had underestimated, the invisible guardians of the estate, the bugs, the cameras, the hidden archive of truth. Few people knew the real story behind those devices. The first head of our family, my great-grandfather, installed them during the war when betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was fatal. Over time, they evolved, updated, concealed, rendered invisible. Each generation added new layers of security, and with it, a deeper sense of duty. We called it the keeper's sight. Every family head inherited access, along with a promise, never to use it for selfish gain, only for preservation. When I became head of the estate, my father told me something that I hadn't fully understood until now. These walls see more than people think, he'd said. But their purpose is not to watch, it's to remember. So when truth fades, it can be replayed. That philosophy had saved me once already, but I had a feeling I'd need it again. 3 days after the letter, I received a call from Douglas, the investigator. "Sir," he said cautiously, "I think you should know something." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" He hesitated before answering. "Becky met with a lawyer in the city yesterday. The same one who used to handle some of your external estate affairs." I felt my pulse quicken. "Go on." "She was with Bruce and Clara. They looked determined." He paused again. "They're trying to file a petition to challenge your authority as head of the family trust, claiming emotional manipulation and unethical surveillance." I almost laughed at the irony. "So the people caught by the cameras are accusing the cameras themselves?" I said. "That's poetic." Douglas sighed. "I just thought you should be prepared. They're desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." After the call, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat by the window overlooking the courtyard. The sunset painted everything gold, as if mocking the decay beneath the beauty. They wanted to challenge me legally, to twist the narrative so that they appeared as victims. I knew Becky's mind, sharp, persuasive, and unrelenting when cornered. She would twist emotion into argument, guilt into leverage, and truth into illusion. I couldn't let that happen. That night, I went down to the old cellar where the original surveillance server was kept, a room known only to the heads of the family. The air smelled of dust and iron. I turned on the single overhead bulb and approached the metal cabinet in the corner. Inside it lay hundreds of drives, each labeled by decade. I inserted the latest drive into the console, watching the footage load. Dozens of screens blinked to life, each showing different rooms across the estate. It was eerie, like staring into memories that refused to die. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for proof. I started organizing the clips that captured the planning and confession of their scheme. Not just the ones from the night of the accusation, but the weeks before it. Becky coaching Clara, Bruce faking financial documents, their whispered conversations about timing Joel's absence. As I compiled the evidence, I realized something that chilled me. They had been planning this far longer than I'd imagined. One clip from 2 months before the dinner showed Becky on the phone, saying, "If we do this right, he'll be gone before Joel even returns. Once Bruce takes his place as trustee, everything shifts to our side." It was clear now, they weren't acting impulsively that night. It was a full-blown conspiracy, months in the making. I saved every file onto a secure encrypted drive and placed it in a sealed envelope labeled Legacy, Truth Archive. If they wanted to challenge me, I would meet them not with anger, but with unbreakable facts. A few days later, the inevitable happened. A formal notice arrived, filed under Becky's name, backed by Bruce's signature. The petition accused me of unethical surveillance, emotional distress, and abuse of family authority. I read it once, then handed it to my lawyer, Mr. Callahan, who simply nodded and said, "Let them come." I could tell he relished the challenge. "We'll respond with evidence," I said, "not emotion. They built their case on lies. We'll bury it with truth." When the day of the hearing came, the family courtroom was filled. Not the grand kind you see on television, but a private hall reserved for family council disputes, an old-fashioned system we'd kept for generations. It wasn't legally binding like state courts, but in our lineage, these hearings carried the weight of legacy. Reputation meant more than law here. Becky entered wearing her favorite navy blue dress, the one she wore whenever she wanted to project calm authority. Bruce followed in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable. Clara, pale and visibly nervous, walked behind them. I could almost feel her trembling from across the room. I sat at the opposing table, calm, collected, with Mr. Callahan beside me. When the council elder, a distant cousin who served as moderator, called the session to order, Becky rose to speak first. "My husband," she began, stressing the word husband like a weapon, "has violated the sanctity of this family by installing hidden surveillance systems to manipulate and control us. These cameras were used not for protection, but for intimidation. He humiliated us publicly, spreading lies and causing emotional harm, all in the name of power." She placed a hand dramatically over her chest. "We demand his removal as head of the family trust." There were murmurs across the room, some sympathetic, some skeptical. I stayed still, letting her words fill the space. When she finished, the moderator turned to me. "You may respond." I stood slowly, clasping my hands behind my back. "For 3 generations," I began, "this family has entrusted its leaders with one sacred duty: to protect both our legacy and our integrity. The surveillance she speaks of was not mine, it was our ancestors. I did not create it. I inherited it, as every head before me has." I looked around the room, my gaze steady. And while Becky speaks of humiliation, she forgets to mention what those recordings revealed: her conspiracy, her lies, her attempt to destroy everything this family stands for. I motioned to Callahan, who handed a remote to the moderator. Within seconds, the projector came to life. The same footage that had played at the dinner filled the room again. The plotting, the laughter, the betrayal. The council members watched in stunned silence. Becky's face turned ghostly white. Bruce shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Clara began to cry softly. When the footage ended, I spoke again. I did not install those cameras to expose them. I simply chose not to ignore what they exposed themselves to be. The moderator cleared his throat, visibly shaken. "The evidence is compelling," he said carefully. "Becky, Bruce, do you deny this?" Becky didn't answer. Bruce slammed his fist on the table. "You think this proves you're right? You think the family will always bow to your control? You'll die bitter and alone, old man." His voice cracked, his arrogance fracturing under pressure. I met his glare with calm resolve. Better to die alone than live surrounded by liars. When the verdict was finally read, it was unanimous. Becky and Bruce were permanently stripped of all inheritance rights, and Clara, though given leniency for cooperation, was banned from the estate. They were ordered to return any remaining funds they had taken. The council adjourned in heavy silence. After everyone left, I lingered in the empty hall, staring at the long table where generations before me had sat. I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything, not because of strangers, but because of those I called family. Yet, there was no satisfaction in victory, only clarity. The truth, once hidden, had been set free, and like all truths, it carried both justice and sorrow in equal measure. That night, as I walked through the dimly lit corridor back to my study, I looked once again at the small, glowing screens. The house was quiet, peaceful, watching, And as I turned off the last monitor, I whispered softly, "Let them think the house sleeps." But I know it never truly does. The night the council announced its verdict should have brought closure, yet I couldn't sleep. Justice rarely feels restful. It hums through the nerves like distant thunder that refuses to fade. I sat alone in my study, the estate cloaked in silence, every lamp casting long shadows that trembled across the old wooden floors. Outside, rain had begun to fall, slow at first, then steady, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. It was the kind of rain that carried memory in its rhythm. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, stared into the amber swirl, and thought about everything that had led here. Love, betrayal, truth, and power, all colliding under one roof like enemies trapped in the same storm. I could have ended it there, closed the gates, erased their names from the records, and left them to their ruin. But something deep inside me refused to rest. Douglas had warned me days earlier that Becky wasn't finished. She still has friends in the city, he'd said. She's angry and desperate people don't think, they react. I had brushed it off then, believing the verdict was enough. But that night, as lightning cut through the sky and thunder rolled across the valley, I realized how naive that was. Some storms aren't weathered, they return. Around midnight, the estate's power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The screens in my study dimmed, the clock stopped ticking, and for a brief, eerie moment, the entire house was swallowed by darkness. I rose from my chair, instinctively reaching for the flashlight in the drawer. "Collins," I called out, but there was no answer. Only the sound of rain intensified, pounding the roof like drums. Then, from somewhere downstairs, a door creaked open. My pulse quickened. The security team had strict instructions. No doors were to open past 10 p.m. I moved quietly through the corridor, flashlight in one hand, the other resting near the revolver locked inside my jacket holster. Old habits die hard when you've led a family that guards secrets for generations. The beam of light sliced through the dark hallway, illuminating portraits of my ancestors staring back at me, stern, watchful, almost expectant. As I reached the staircase, I heard voices. Faint. Female. Familiar. "Are you sure he's asleep?" one whispered. "Positive," another replied. My stomach turned. Becky's voice. I stepped closer to the banister and peered down. 3 silhouettes stood in the foyer, rainwater glistening on their coats. Becky, Bruce, and Clara. They had returned. Becky's hair was soaked, plastered to her face, but her eyes gleamed with the same fury I had seen at the council. Bruce held something metallic, a crowbar, and Clara, trembling behind them, clutched a small black bag. I recognized it immediately. That was my legacy vault keychain, the one that opened the cellar. Somehow, they had stolen a duplicate. Bruce spoke first, his tone low but sharp. "We get the drive, destroy it, and leave before sunrise. Without that footage, he's got nothing." Becky nodded. "And if he wakes up?" Bruce smirked. "Then the old man will wish he hadn't." For a moment, time froze. I watched them move toward the cellar door, the same place that guarded the archives of every generation before me. That was their target, the truth itself. My anger, which I thought had been buried beneath composure, rose like fire through my veins. They hadn't come for revenge. They had come to erase history. I moved swiftly down the back staircase, careful not to let the wood creak. The storm outside masked my steps. By the time I reached the corridor near the cellar, Bruce had already pried the lock halfway open. Becky stood beside him, urging him on. "Hurry," she whispered. Clara lingered behind, her eyes darting nervously around the hallway. When she saw me emerge from the shadows, she froze. Our eyes met, hers wide with terror, mine calm but cold. I raised a finger to my lips, silently warning her not to speak. Bruce finally forced the door open and stepped inside, disappearing into the darkness below. Becky followed, holding a small flashlight. I waited until their footsteps echoed deep enough, then whispered, "You shouldn't have come back, Clara." She began to cry softly. "I didn't want this," she said. "They said they'd ruin me if I didn't help." I nodded slowly. "Then step aside." Descending those cellar stairs felt like walking into history itself, the scent of earth and iron, the hum of hidden machines beneath layers of time. Their voices echoed ahead of me. Bruce grunted as he pried open the metal cabinet. "There it is," he said triumphantly. "The drive." Becky's voice trembled with excitement. "Destroy it. Smash it. Everything he has against us is in there." I stepped out of the shadows. "You're wrong," I said. The beam of Bruce's flashlight swung toward me, momentarily blinding me. How did you?" Becky stammered. I raised my hand and pointed upward. "You tripped the motion sensors the moment you entered. The power didn't fail tonight. I cut it myself." Their expressions shifted from shock to dread. "You set us up," Bruce spat. "Again?" "No," I said quietly. "You set yourselves up, again. I just gave you the rope." I could feel the weight of generations pressing on that moment. My grandfather's voice echoed in memory. "One day, the walls will test your judgment. When that day comes, don't act from anger, act from truth." So I didn't shout. I didn't threaten. I simply walked past them, reached for the cabinet, and pressed a small button hidden beneath the shelf. A concealed camera blinked red to life, recording everything. "This time," I said, "you'll record your own downfall." Bruce lunged forward, swinging the crowbar. I sidestepped just in time. The metal scraped the wall, sending sparks flying. "You think you can control me forever?" he shouted. Becky screamed his name, but he didn't stop. Years of resentment burned in his eyes, the fury of a man who couldn't stand living in another's shadow. I grabbed his wrist mid-swing, twisting until the crowbar clattered to the floor. The old training from my younger years came back instinctively. "You were never my enemy, Bruce," I said through clenched teeth. "But you chose to become one." Becky lunged toward the cabinet, reaching for the drive, but I caught her arm before she could grab it. "Enough," I said. "You've disgraced this family once. Don't do it again." Her voice broke, the venom finally dissolving into desperation. "You took everything from me," she cried. "Everything I built, everything I deserved." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, Becky, you mistook what was shared for what was yours. That's not inheritance, it's theft." Clara, sobbing in the corner, suddenly shouted, "Stop, please." Her voice cracked through the tension like lightning. She turned toward Becky. "He's right. We've gone too far. Joel will never forgive me for this." Becky turned on her sharply. "You think he'll forgive you if he finds out the truth? You're already ruined, girl." Clara collapsed to her knees, crying uncontrollably. I turned to Bruce, who stood panting, defeated. "Look at what your greed has done," I said. "It's destroyed the very people who tried to love you." At that moment, the cellar lights flickered back on. Collins had restored the power. The sudden brightness revealed the wreckage, scattered tools, torn envelopes, trembling hands, and 3 broken hearts standing in the ruins of their own making. I picked up the encrypted drive and slipped it into my pocket. "Leave," I said. "Now, before I call the police. You'll get no second redemption under this roof." Becky stared at me, eyes hollow. "You can banish us from the estate," she whispered, "but you'll never wash your soul clean of what you did tonight." I met her gaze steadily. "If protecting the truth is sin, then I'll bear it proudly." She turned away, shoulders shaking, and slowly led Bruce and Clara out of the cellar. Their footsteps faded into the storm above. When I emerged moments later, the rain had stopped. Dawn was breaking, painting the estate in muted gold. I walked to the main hall, where the portraits of my forefathers watched silently. For the first time, I felt not just their gaze, but their approval. Justice wasn't about punishment, it was about restoration. I had not sought revenge, I had preserved legacy. As I stood there, Collins approached quietly. "It's over, sir," he said. "For now," I replied. He nodded knowingly. "You think they'll come back?" I looked toward the horizon, where clouds still lingered. "People like that don't disappear. They just wait for the next storm. But this house," I said, glancing up at the walls, "has weathered worse." Later that evening, I sealed the vault again, resetting the locks and updating the access codes. I wrote a new entry in the family ledger, the book that held the confessions and wisdom of every generation. My pen moved slowly, each word deliberate. Let truth be our weapon, not vengeance. Let legacy stand watch, not fear. And when betrayal returns, may these walls remember how justice once sounded. When I closed the book, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. For the first time, the estate felt alive again, not haunted by lies, but cleansed by revelation. As I poured the last drink of the night, I raised the glass toward the empty chairs around the long table. To the watchers before me, I whispered, and to the truth that never sleeps. Morning broke over the estate like the slow lifting of a curtain after a long, sleepless play. The sky was washed pale blue, the kind that hides the wounds of a night storm, and the first beams of sunlight spilled across the courtyard stones still wet from rain. I stood by the library window watching steam rise from the hedges, every drop catching light like tiny shards of glass. The house breathed again. It felt different, cleaner, quieter, and yet heavier, as though the very walls were deciding whether to forgive what they had witnessed. I thought of the cellar, of Becky's trembling eyes, of Bruce's rage, and of Clara's sobbing confession. Justice had come, but peace, I learned, never walks in right behind it. It waits until the heart can make room. Collins entered softly, carrying the morning paper on a silver tray. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying that cautious tone servants use when the news might bruise their masters. "They're in the papers again." He placed it beside my coffee and stepped back. The headline read, "Family Scandal Deepens. Estranged Members Challenge Estate Decision." There they were, Becky, Bruce, and Clara, photographed outside a courthouse, faces drawn but defiant. The article claimed they were appealing to public sympathy, accusing me of using hidden surveillance to terrorize my own family. I smiled faintly. They were still fighting shadows. "Should I call Mr. Callahan?" Collins asked. "No," I said. "Let them speak. Every liar eventually runs out of words." I spent the next few hours walking the property, inspecting the grounds as I used to with my father. The gardeners greeted me with newfound warmth. Even the hounds, usually restless, seemed subdued. Order had returned, but I knew it was only surface calm. In families like ours, wealth was never the true inheritance, reputation was. And reputation, once cracked, spreads fractures you can't always see. By afternoon, I gathered the family council again, not for a trial this time, but for closure. I wanted every remaining member to understand what had happened, why it happened, and what it meant for our lineage moving forward. When they arrived, the long dining table that had once hosted chaos now gleamed under the chandelier. I sat at the head, the seat that for a moment I almost lost, and waited until the murmurs died down. "Tonight," I began, "we are not here to reopen wounds. We are here to seal them." I let that sink in before continuing. What happened within these walls will be remembered for generations, not because of scandal, but because of how it ended, with truth prevailing. Several nodded silently. Some looked uneasy. I didn't blame them. Trust is the last thing that grows back after betrayal. I reached for the family ledger, the same book I had written in the night before. Its leather cover was worn smooth by time, its pages heavy with ink and judgment. "Our ancestors believed," I read aloud, "that every keeper of this estate must confront one night when loyalty is tested. That night determines not wealth or power, but worth." I closed the book gently. That night has come and gone for me. Now I pass to all of you a warning. Guard not only our fortune, but our honor. Because without honor, an inheritance is nothing but expensive rot. Daniel, my nephew, raised his hand timidly. "Uncle, what of Bruce and the others? Will they ever be allowed back?" I looked at him for a long moment, weighing compassion against duty. "Forgiveness," I said finally, "is a privilege, not a right. They may earn it someday, but the doors they kicked open cannot be unbroken. Until they show repentance, not performance, they remain outside." He nodded, eyes downcast. In that moment, I realized the real inheritance I wanted to leave wasn't gold, it was understanding. After the meeting, I returned to the study where the screens glowed softly. Each camera now fed into a new encrypted system, modernized, tamper-proof, hidden even deeper. The house would continue to watch, but now under a different purpose, preservation, not suspicion. I archived the recordings of the entire ordeal into a secure vault, labeling it the reckoning. It would remain locked until the day the next head of the family needed to learn why truth must never depend on trust alone. That evening, as twilight brushed against the estate, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something in the silence on the line after the second ring told me it was no telemarketer. "Hello," I said. For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then a familiar voice, small and cracked, whispered, "It's Clara." I closed my eyes, letting her name settle like dust. "What do you want, Clara?" I asked quietly. Her breathing hitched. "I needed to tell you. I left them. Becky and Bruce. They're planning to sell stories about you to the media. But I can't live like this anymore. Joel deserves to know the truth before they poison his mind." Her words sliced deeper than I expected. Joel, my son, her husband, the soldier who'd trusted us all, still hadn't returned. He was due back in a week, and he would walk into a family that had burned itself from the inside out. "Where are you now?" I asked. "At a motel outside the city," she said. "I'm scared." I sighed, torn between anger and pity. "Clara," I said finally, "what you did nearly destroyed everything. But if you're ready to tell the truth, I'll make sure you're protected." There was silence, then a soft, relieved sob. "Thank you," she whispered, and the line went dead. The next day I met her in person. She looked frail, haunted, her once bright eyes now hollow from guilt and sleepless nights. She handed me a small folder. Inside were printouts of text messages, bank statements, and signed agreements. Proof that Becky and Bruce were indeed attempting to sell falsified stories to tabloids. She had recorded their conversations, perhaps unconsciously learning from the house itself that truth always leaves a trail. When she finished explaining, I asked her only one question. "Why tell me now?" She stared at the floor. "Because I want my child to know his grandfather isn't the monster they said he was." It was the first honest sentence she'd spoken in months. I paid for her protection quietly. No publicity, no drama. Becky and Bruce, however, weren't as discreet. Within days their fabricated story reached the press, and the tabloids devoured it. They painted themselves as victims, me as a manipulative patriarch obsessed with control. But lies age quickly under scrutiny. When the court subpoenaed the very evidence they had sold, it matched the recordings I'd already archived. Proof of their plotting, their deceit, their greed. Their credibility collapsed overnight. Even the tabloids retracted their stories. They became what betrayal always turns its architects into, ghosts of their own ambition. That night, I sat once more in the grand hall beneath the chandelier, the same place where it had all begun. The air felt lighter, almost sacred, as if the house itself was exhaling relief. I poured a final drink, raised my glass toward the portraits, and spoke softly to the memory of everyone who had come before me. "I have carried your burden and your wisdom," I said. "I have seen how truth can destroy and rebuild in the same breath. Let the next generation learn from our scars, not repeat them." The chandelier flickered slightly, as though the house acknowledged the vow. Joel returned a week later. He found me in the garden pruning roses, unaware of how deeply the thorns had bled the family in his absence. When he asked where Clara was, I told him everything, not all at once, but piece by piece, as gently as one removes stitches from a healing wound. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening, his eyes glistening. When I finished, he didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "I trusted them, Dad. All of them. How did you know who to believe?" I looked at the roses in my hand and said, "I didn't. I just learned to wait until the petals fell off on their own." He nodded slowly, understanding more than words could hold. By sunset, he went to see Clara. What passed between them I may never know, but when he returned later that night, he said only one thing. "You did what you had to do." That was enough. The next morning he left the estate again, this time not for war, but for peace, taking Clara with him to start anew somewhere far from the ghosts of our walls. I watched their car disappear down the long driveway, the same path Becky once took, and whispered a silent prayer that history wouldn't circle back. Weeks passed, then months. The scandal faded from memory, replaced by whispers of respect. Neighbors who once gossiped began to greet me warmly again. Business partners who hesitated to call started visiting the estate for counsel. The family name, though scarred, endured. And I understood at last what my father meant when he said leadership was less about ruling and more about enduring. Every generation inherits both fortune and failure. The true head is the one who can turn one into wisdom. Tonight, as I write the final entry in this story, the rain has returned. Not angry this time. Gentle, rhythmic, almost forgiving. I sit by the same window where this began, the soft glow of the lamp reflecting in the glass, and I can see my own reflection faintly smiling back. There is peace in knowing that truth, once revealed, never dies. It becomes part of the walls, the air, the very foundation of the home it defended. I close the ledger one last time and whisper to the unseen generations who will someday read it. Guard the house, guard the truth, and never mistake silence for safety. For even in darkness, the estate remembers. And as the final candle flickers out, I add a quiet note for those who listen from beyond the story. If this tale reminded you that truth has its own vengeance, then like, share, and subscribe. May every ear that hears find the courage to speak, and every heart that breaks find the strength to rebuild.